see things the way you do, but I know we feel the same. In a world with too much heartache, too much sadness, brings too much pain. But there's something inside people that puts hope inside of me, and it makes you see the good side of a world that's never free. Oh, I believe in miracles and in the good I see. So is it any wonder that there's hope inside of me?
So to achieve progress in bringing this community in out of the cold, research has to be the point of departure. There is a total lack of an evidence base on the most effective models of support. Therefore, parents, and not just parents, professionals, have been pleading over many years for research. With many interventions being ineffective, expensive, or indeed hazardous, parents feel particularly vulnerable. And children often show no signs of physical or intellectual impairment. And therefore, treatments are susceptible to unfounded therapies. And in adulthood, what often happens is the responses are too late and are crisis-driven and expensive. So in short, there's an urgent need for vigorous science to tackle these very poor outcomes, which are hugely expensive to society, and the dramatic increase in unfounded claims. Now, Research Autism was launched not so long ago, 2004. We had the support of the NES, and sponsorship from Cambridge University. Independence was and is critical, because we have to be able to comment objectively on the validity of or effectiveness of treatments. Our first step was to establish an independent online information service, which gave totally trusted, and does give totally trusted, reliable information on what works, what doesn't work. We gained credibility fairly quickly. An organisation called New Philanthropy Capital immediately, within a couple of years, said this is a charity that is important in this sphere, and we've had positive words from the likes of the Prime Minister. We've also rapidly gained, and I'm very happy to see quite a number around the room, the support of the experts. Lorna Wing here, one of our early trustees, Anne Nakuta, Gillian Baird, thank you so much for coming on and supporting us. And Tony Charman, who you'll be hearing next. Professor Charman, clinical psychologist, chair in autism education at the Institute of Education, did a study about 10 years ago, before we were launched, which confirmed that little or no research was going on. It was a powerful influence in why Research Autism was set up, and it was also very important information for us in establishing our research priorities. Together with the views of parents, we went out and canvassed the views of parents. And we've initiated research largely focused on children. So we did a study on early diagnosis. Clearly, the earlier you can diagnose, the better. We've done it, or we are in the process of doing quite a number of studies on sleep, because this can be devastating for the individual, devastating for the family. We have done a study, Sheffield University, on bullying, on identifying what the issues are. We've now got to try and address how we do something about it. And Guy's and St Thomas's, Gillian Baird, have led a study on the early markers for challenging behaviour, a very good study, which we hope will be a really good guide for parents. But as Tony's mapping exercise was some time ago, we managed to gain funding, and he is initiating another study, and we'll be talking next. I should say he was going to be followed by Vince Gable, who is not here, and I'm very happy to say that he will be followed by Claire Anders, who I will introduce at the appropriate time. So thank you very much, Tony.
Thank you, Geoffrey, and it's a pleasure to be here today. The first thing I need to say is that Liz Pellicano, my colleague from the Centre for Research on Autism Education, and myself are extremely grateful to Research Autism and the other charities who have contributed to funding what we're calling the Re-Mapping Autism Research project. As Geoffrey says, it was 10 years ago that actually it was parent organisations. It was Virginia Bovell, who's here, I know, from Parents Autism Campaign for Education, and David Potter, who's sadly no longer with us, from the National Autistic Society, with another friend of theirs, Sue Thomas from PACE, who came to me and said, we think it's important for the autism community to do a mapping of autism research. We need to know what's done in the UK, what's done in other countries. We need to know the opinions. What do parents think about the research that's done? What do scientists think about it? What do people with autism think about it? So we did something 10 years ago that we launched at a similar reception here at the House of Commons. And that told us for the first time some of the ways in which the views about what should be priorities for research were similar between different parts of the autism community, but also ways in which some of the views differed. So what we do know about autism research is that here in the UK for several decades, the UK's been a world leader in some aspects of autism research. So there are really key areas where some of the leading studies and the leading researchers have come from here in the UK. So work on early screening led by Gillian Baird and her group, work on genetics, work by a number of people here in the room and elsewhere on understanding better how people with autism think, how people with autism perceive the world around them. So the UK, has got a great track record in some areas. What's important is that in the current climate, with the fiscally challenging times, that are going to be here for a while, that research money is spent in the right way to ensure that the UK continues to take a leading role in global research on autism. So one of the things we're going to be doing is to understand and do a mapping, as we call it, of what research is done and what research is funded here in the UK. And one of the things that we'll be paying attention to is very much looking at the international context. So we're very interested to understand what research is done and what research is funded here compared to the rest of Europe, what research is done and what research is funded here compared to North America and to the other continents. One of the reasons for that is in our previous mapping 10 years ago, we found that there were some areas where research was just not being done, or certainly not being done to a great enough extent that applied internationally. So the two areas that stood out there was just very little research in the literature wherever you looked for it, whichever countries you were going to, whichever funding agencies you were asking, very little research being done on adults with autism. There was also very little work, and this is a surprise, being done into services and how effective those services are. So that was something where there wasn't a great deal of activity in the UK in those areas, but there wasn't in other countries either. But then there were some areas where the UK was really falling behind, and the area that stood out most to us at the time, where other countries, other communities were doing more research and getting more research funded, was in research into the effectiveness of different interventions. And that's something that's really only just begun in a major way in the UK in the past few years. So it's very interesting. Research Autism have just done an exercise jointly with the National Autistic Society that Lorna Wing and Richard Mills, who are here, led on, asking the autism community, primarily family members who responded, nearly 400 individuals responded to a survey, and they were asked to rank what they thought were the most important areas that we need to do research in. This is a sort of preliminary part of what we're going to do in the Re-Mapping project in a much more extended way. But I've just seen the draft of that report. It's not publicly available yet. So what's interesting is that two things really stood out. Families were saying we need more research into interventions, we need more research into services that support families. So that's what families are telling us, and that's something we're going to interrogate in a more detailed way in the project we're going to be undertaking over the next 12 months. One other thing we're going to be doing is to really engage in a very broad way with different stakeholders within the autism community. So that's people with autism themselves, parents, carers, professionals from health, education, social care, scientists. Us scientists do think we have a view that may be valid in some ways as well because of our special sort of expertise. So one of the things we'll be doing, again, but in a much broader way than we have before, is saying, well, what do those different stakeholder communities, what do those different groups see as priorities, but also wanting to use different methodologies, various qualitative methodologies, to really bury under any differences that we find. We need to understand why people see different things as priorities in different ways, and then use that information to be talking with a sort of authoritative voice to the appropriate authorities about what's needed here in the UK. So overall, what we aim to do, one of the key aims of the project is to highlight gaps here in UK research, both in terms of research activity and in terms of research funding. We think that's critical. You know, in the coming decade, with the finite resources that are going to be available across the whole community, we need to let government departments, we need to let funding agencies like the research councils, and we need to let the third sector organisations and charities involved in funding autism research, we need to tell them both what the gaps are and also what the community actually is asking for in terms of the next decade of autism research. That's one of the aims. The other aim is to make sure that the UK stays, you know, a global leader in autism research, but the research that it does, importantly, actually matters. The research has a real and a positive impact on the lives of individuals affected with autism, on the lives of their families, and on society as a whole. We hope to come back here or elsewhere locally in 12 months' time and tell us what you've and tell you what we've found, and we hope many of you can join us then. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Tony, for that very clear outline of what we're planning to do. I have the great pleasure in introducing Claire Enders, founder and chief executive of Enders Analysis and a mother of an autistic child. Enders Analysis is now one of the leading independent research companies in the UK. It focuses very much on the media and entertainment, mobile and fixed telecommunications, as I understand it, on Europe, although it has a worldwide perspective. Claire has been a huge supporter of Research Autism. She shares a powerful affinity with us. Firstly, like Research Autism, as I understand it, Enders Analysis is totally independent, impartial and grounded in analysis, which is what we try to do. Secondly, of course, she's demonstrated with her son that there are ways in which to overcome the odds. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Jeffrey, for your very generous words. And I'll just give you my own little brief story in about 5 minutes about why it is that I support Research Autism, why it is extraordinarily important to achieve the research aims that have just been outlined. And that is because the story of my son's remarkable convergence with the normal world hasn't been entirely driven by eminent research institutions, in particular the Yale Center for Child Study and the University of Aberdeen. And indeed, my son's wonderful guide, our guide in life, Dr. Justin Williams, is here this afternoon. And meeting him was absolutely life-transforming for us. So very briefly, my son was diagnosed with quite strange neurological problems when he was 9 months old. And like many parents with this kind of difficulty, we did Fragile X testing and so on and so forth. By the time we got to the Yale Center for Child Study, which was then considered, my son is about to be 18, so this is many years ago, which was then considered the most comprehensive early diagnostic place, and parents who heaved children with who, as Jeffrey knows very well, I mean, my son not only thought the world was really painful, but even if you touched his head or tried to cut a little hair off of it, it hurt. And so the whole experience of going over to Yale, of trying to understand what these people with American accents were saying, was all very demanding for him. But they gave us very, very good advice, in particular the necessity to address his physical problems, which were by then really very significant. I mean, he was by then 2.5 years behind age 4 and incomprehensively and so on. And a very kind neurophysiologist in Kirkcaldy told us that Thomas would never read and write, might never read and write. He was rejected from normal schools in London. It was indicated to us that we might be considering a school for children with really very severe physical difficulties of this type, since he was unable to feed himself until the age of 6, and was unable to tie his shoelaces until he was 13. And it has been a very, very difficult experience, I have to say, all along. And very fortunately, we were able to package my son with our completely normal daughter and a carer in a school in St. Andrews, which Thomas has attended until he was since he was 4, and started his finals just yesterday. I have to say that my son has offers from Cambridge and St. Andrews to read history. And so the school pushed him along. He somehow got through. I mean, we were used to report cards that said NA. I mean, we constantly felt incredibly fortunate that our child was in some kind of environment where he would go towards the GCSEs. He might have a chance at going to universities. He might fulfill what was obviously an extraordinarily powerful mind, which began to manifest itself when, despite the predictions, he taught himself how to read entirely by using his memory, and began to build what is the world's most titanic memory engine ever encountered. And I say this as I have quite a titanic one myself. And so my son, although he was really cornered by his physical movement problems and all of the complexity of navigating in space with hyperacusis and hyperacute hearing and so on, and obviously enormous difficulty in staying upright, he just settled down and started to read and has never stopped. And this has proved to be a remarkable gift, and one which has allowed him to converge with an educational system that does actually push reading a lot. And although my son has had great struggles on everything else, there is no one who's been more determined than him to get over things. That said, he writes at 2% of the speed of his age cohort and is really functionally physically illiterate. However, he's able to type slowly and able to express himself. And despite being verbally dyspraxic, because we got an actor, we got him acting lessons. He's been able to learn how to speak and express himself, and he is a joy. He's a joyful child. I mean, he is a ball and chain. He has only spent 10 days outside of some kind of parental link all this time, and I can't tell you how hopeful we are that he gets out and into university, although we'll have to make sure that he's very supported and that he doesn't freak out and that all the difficulties of life don't get on top of him. But I must just say, that without Justin Williams, we would not have had these outcomes. He was very wise. He gave us very good advice about medication when things didn't work out for the first medication, to try to deal with the ADD and the movement, sort of trying to knit together whatever Thomas could master in terms of left-rightness, which was modest. He was incredibly flexible, present, not fussed. I mean, we were never encouraged to treat my son's panoply of conditions except in a kind of a break it down, deal with this problem this way, try to deal with it that way, and if this doesn't work, try this, and just keep going and give your child infinite love. And as Jeffrey has said, despite the fact that I am undoubtedly an alpha female and that it was one of the hardest things to learn that my son might never learn how to read and write, I wouldn't have changed 1 minute of the journey that we've been on with my son, because we've been on it with people who care very deeply about parents and about the children with these conditions, and who understand them very deeply, and the growth in the attention to the panoply of conditions and how they interact. These are things that make me incredibly hopeful that from where we were when my son was 1 and 2 and 3, and the really very poor outlook that he faced then. And of course, the evidence that Jeffrey has provided, which shows that people with those very poor outlooks and can in previous times face a lifetime of lack of engagement. And as Jeffrey says, it's being engaged which changes us all and expands our beings, as I have known for the many, many years I have been alive. So I very much hope that all the gains that have been made through the knitting together of the researchers worldwide who are constantly dealing with both an advance in the number of children to treat and the number of adults to treat, but also in hopefully in the practicalities and usefulness of a number of different treatments and medications, which will hopefully achieve the kinds of results that my son's extraordinarily fine care has achieved. Thank you so much.
So my final message is that Research Autism is a young organisation. We do not have deep roots. We need help. We really do need help to tackle these huge issues, and we're sure people in this room understand the need. My own view is that the trouble of a child entirely and severely bullied in school and the subsequent mental health issues is our trouble. The trouble of a young person on leaving school being abandoned in specialist services and falling into despondency is our trouble. The trouble of a hopeful young adult constantly failing to find work and therefore having to live in social isolation and worse is our trouble. And the trouble with what happens when parents die, as most live at home, is our trouble. And we need to address it. We need to ensure they do not lead isolated, defenceless lives. And we need all your support with the research. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you to our sponsors, both of you, Boxwood and Sage, without which this would not happen.